Well, she did with ESPN. The WNBA has taken off the past few years, but it's weird to see it this year. It feels like a lot of black women in the league have been criticized. Has that been a downer? You know, the ESPN shills setting her up to cry about race and victim, but that's what they do at ESPN. We're not surprised. It really has, in my sense, because it feels like it's not like we're timid, but it's like you don't want us to do stuff. I threw in that because that's how you just don't want to hear the noise. It strips us from the genuine and pureness and love of the game. Just like, I don't even want to go down this road. I know it's going to be some idiotic person that's going to talk crazy, and then I have to continue to take the high road, aka...
It only took a few seconds. No argument, no words exchanged, just a look. And somehow that quiet moment said more about the WNBA than any press conference ever could. When A'ja Wilson, the two-time MVP and undisputed face of the league's most dominant franchise, turned her head at an NBA game and locked eyes with a fan wearing a Caitlin Clark jersey, the energy shifted instantly. Not because anything was said, but because everything underneath it finally became visible. That split-second exchange has now been replayed millions of times, slowed down, zoomed in, memed, and argued over like it's evidence in a trial. Some people saw insecurity, others saw frustration. Some saw a harmless coincidence blown out of proportion. But here's the part nobody can deny. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It felt loaded because it was loaded. It carried months of tension, interviews, online debates, and a league that exploded so fast it didn't stop to ask who might feel left behind. Just days earlier, Wilson said something on ESPN that stopped people cold. She admitted that being a black woman in the WNBA right now feels silencing, that the joy of the game is slipping away, that certain arenas don't feel welcoming anymore. And whether you agree with her or not, that context matters, because suddenly that quiet moment at the Heat game wasn't just awkward, it felt symbolic. One look, one jersey, and a fan base war, a league identity crisis, and a conversation about attention, race, and power all collided at once. And the deeper you look into it, the clearer it becomes. This story isn't really about one kid, one jersey, or even one player. It's about what happens when women's basketball finally gets the spotlight, and not everyone likes where it lands. It happened in a place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Not a WNBA arena, not a rivalry game, just a regular night at an NBA game. Miami Heat fans packed into FTX Arena, the cameras roaming the crowd the way they always do. Sitting courtside was A'ja Wilson, relaxed, smiling, there to support her off-season training partner. No press conference, no controversy, just basketball. And 2 seats away sat a kid, maybe 12 years old. No sign, no camera awareness, just a jersey, navy blue number 22, an Indiana Fever jersey with Caitlin Clark stitched across the back. That's it. That's the entire setup. And yet somehow that was enough. When Wilson turned her head and noticed the jersey, the moment changed. You can see it if you watch closely. A pause, a half-second where the smile fades just enough to be noticeable. Not anger, not outrage, just something registering internally. And the kid, sensing the shift, did what kids do when they feel awkward around adults with cameras on them. He turned away. No words exchanged, no reaction beyond body language. And yet, within hours, the internet had decided this wasn't nothing. It was a symbol. The clip spread fast because it fit perfectly into a narrative that was already boiling. Fans didn't see a superstar at a basketball game. They saw tension made physical. A league veteran sitting next to the face of the future, represented by a jersey on a child who didn't even realize he'd become part of a culture war. Some people called it overblown, others called it revealing. But either way, the reason it went viral had nothing to do with what happened in those 5 seconds, and everything to do with what people already believed was happening behind the scenes. And that's what made this moment so powerful. It was quiet enough to be interpreted 1,000 different ways, but familiar enough that everyone felt like they understood it. Because by the time that camera zoomed in, the tension was already there. The look just confirmed it. And once that confirmation exists, it doesn't matter how small the moment was, the story has already started writing itself. and the next part of that story didn't unfold on a basketball court at all. Long before that courtside moment ever existed, A'ja Wilson had already said something that quietly shifted how people looked at the entire season. During a September interview with ESPN, she openly spoke about how the WNBA's sudden explosion didn't feel like joy from the inside. It felt heavy, it felt tense, and more importantly, she admitted that certain road trips, especially Indiana, made her uneasy, not because of the city itself, but because of what she believed might come with the attention surrounding Caitlin Clark and her fans. That alone stopped people in their tracks. A reigning MVP, one of the most dominant players the league has ever seen, openly admitting she dreaded playing in a specific arena. That's not normal language in professional sports. Athletes are trained to downplay pressure, to embrace hostile crowds, to thrive in environments where the noise is loud and the expectations are heavier. But Wilson didn't frame it that way. She described the season as emotionally exhausting, as 4 straight months of feeling like she had to constantly choose between silence and scrutiny. She explained that it felt like damned if you do, damned if you don't, that no matter how she carried herself, how mature she tried to be, or how carefully she chose her words, there was always another reaction waiting online. And she wasn't just speaking for herself. She framed it as something many black women in the league were experiencing together. A feeling that the surge of attention wasn't lifting everyone equally, that certain stories were being amplified, while others were quietly pushed aside.
It's important to be clear here. Wilson wasn't attacking Clark directly. She never accused her of wrongdoing. What she expressed was emotional fatigue, a sense that the league she helped build was changing so fast that she didn't recognize her place in it anymore. But once those words were out in public, the interpretation spiraled. Some fans heard vulnerability, others heard resentment, and many took it as proof that something deeper was brewing beneath the surface. Because when a player of Wilson's stature says she feels uncomfortable, fans don't hear nuance, they hear conflict. The interview instantly became a dividing line. To some, it validated long-standing conversations about race and visibility in women's sports. To others, it sounded like frustration over not being the center of attention anymore. But that split matters, because from that point forward, everything Wilson did was filtered through those comments. Every reaction, every clip, every look suddenly carried extra weight, especially the ones captured on camera, even when no words were spoken. What made those ESPN comments hit even harder was the timing, because the numbers didn't lie. The WNBA didn't just grow in 2024, it detonated. Games that once struggled to crack 6 figures suddenly pulled in millions of viewers. Arenas that used to feel half full were packed, loud, and sold out weeks in advance. Merchandise flew off shelves, national broadcasts became routine instead of rare. Women's basketball wasn't asking for attention anymore. It had it. And at the center of that surge was Caitlin Clark. Her arrival didn't feel gradual, it felt seismic. Attendance across the league jumped dramatically, but nowhere was it more visible than in Indiana. The Indiana Fever, once a franchise averaging a few thousand fans a night, suddenly couldn't keep seats empty. Road games turned into de facto home games. Jerseys appeared in arenas that had nothing to do with the Fever. Clark didn't just draw fans, she brought a whole new audience that wasn't previously watching the WNBA at all. That kind of growth is supposed to be good news for everyone. In theory, more eyes mean more money, more endorsements, more respect. But in reality, attention isn't evenly distributed. And while Clark became the headline everywhere she went, players who had dominated the league for years were watching the spotlight shift in real time, none more accomplished than A'ja Wilson. Here's the tension no one wants to say out loud. Wilson was playing some of the best basketball of her career at the exact moment the league stopped feeling like it revolved around her. She was putting up historic numbers, she was winning awards, she was leading championship contenders. And yet, the coverage, the conversation, the cultural buzz kept drifting elsewhere. Not because Wilson declined, but because the story changed. This is where things stopped feeling celebratory for some players, because when growth comes with a new face attached to it, the old faces can feel replaced instead of rewarded. The league didn't slowly expand, it rebranded overnight. And the question became less about who was the best player and more about who people were tuning in to see. That shift doesn't show up in box scores, but it's impossible to miss when you're living inside it. And this is the part that complicates everything. You can acknowledge Clark's impact and understand why that imbalance would sting. You can celebrate the explosion of women's basketball and recognize that not everyone benefited from it the same way. Because when the spotlight narrows instead of widens, it doesn't just create excitement, it creates friction. And that friction was quietly building long before a courtside camera ever caught it. This is where the conversation shifted from basketball to something far more personal. Because when A'ja Wilson talked about feeling silenced, she wasn't just describing reduced media attention. She was describing what it feels like when success around you starts to resemble erasure instead of elevation. In that ESPN interview, she framed the league's sudden obsession with one storyline as something that left other players, especially black women, feeling invisible no matter how well they performed. To be clear, what followed online wasn't proof or disproof of her claim. It was reaction, and reaction is rarely patient. Some fans immediately amplified her words, saying this was a long overdue moment of honesty. Others pushed back just as hard, arguing that popularity isn't injustice and that attention gravitates towards what feels new, exciting, and accessible. But once the conversation split like that, nuance disappeared. The discussion stopped being about numbers or narratives and became about motive.
Wilson's comments were interpreted by many as an explanation for why she felt disconnected from the league's momentum. She wasn't denying the growth, she was questioning who it centered. And when she said that being told it's not about race boiled her blood, that line in particular traveled fast. Because once race enters the conversation, people stop listening for understanding and start choosing sides. And the internet doesn't do subtle. What complicated things further was the comparison that kept popping up everywhere. Fans pointed out that Caitlin Clark wasn't being celebrated instead of Wilson because of demographics, but because she brought spectacle. Deep-range shots, viral moments, a college career people still talk about. From that perspective, Clark's popularity looked earned, not assigned. And that's where the backlash formed, not against Wilson's feelings, but against the implication that someone else's rise had to come at her expense. Whether that was Wilson's intention or not almost became irrelevant, because once that perception took hold, her words were no longer heard as vulnerability, they were heard as grievance. And grievance plays differently when you're at the top of the league. Fans tend to forgive frustration from underdogs. They struggle to accept it from champions, especially champions who are still winning. That's why this section of the story feels so uncomfortable. Two things can be true at once. The league can have structural issues that affect visibility, and fans can still be drawn organically to one player's style of play. The problem wasn't that Wilson spoke up, it was that the moment she did, everything she said and everything she didn't say started being filtered through a lens of resentment. And once that lens forms, even silence feels loud. The internet didn't treat the Heat game clip like a misunderstanding, it treated it like a revelation. Within hours, that few-second moment was detached from its original context and repackaged into something bigger. Not a coincidence, not an awkward pause, a symbol. Fans clipped it, looped it, zoomed in, slowed it down, and layered it with captions that turned body language into a statement. And once that happens, the original intent no longer matters. Supporters of Caitlin Clark ran with it immediately. To them, it confirmed what they already believed, that some established stars were uncomfortable with the attention Clark brought into the league. Memes popped up joking about being watched, about jerseys having power, about the look meaning everything without saying anything at all. It was framed as humor, but humor has teeth. Every joke landed as a reminder that the narrative momentum had shifted away from A'ja Wilson, whether she wanted it to or not. What made it worse was the contrast. The kid in the jersey wasn't confrontational, he wasn't chanting, he wasn't doing anything fans could point to and defend as provocation. That emptiness let people project whatever story they wanted onto him. In some versions, he became a stand-in for Clark's entire fan base. In others, he represented the future of the league sitting comfortably next to its present, and Wilson, fairly or unfairly, became the symbol of resistance to that future. This is where the narrative really slipped out of her control, because fans didn't just react, they assigned roles. Clark supporters cast themselves as amused, unbothered, and inevitable. Wilson, in their framing, became tense, guarded, and unwilling to let go of center stage. Whether that's accurate or not almost stopped mattering. Social media rewards clean stories, not complicated truths. And the more the clip circulated, the harder it became to separate Wilson the player from Wilson the symbol. A dominant MVP season couldn't overwrite a 5-second viral moment. In the attention economy, images beat explanations every time, especially when those images seem to line up with something the player already said out loud. By then, the clip wasn't just entertainment, it was evidence. And once fans believe they have evidence, they stop asking questions and start keeping score. This is where the comparisons started doing real damage, not because they were fair, but because they were inevitable. Once the narrative formed, fans didn't just look at A'ja Wilson on her own terms anymore. They measured her reactions against an unwritten rulebook that elite athletes are expected to follow. One that says stars don't flinch when attention shifts, they don't talk about being uncomfortable, and they definitely don't frame popularity as something that needs managing. Across sports, the expectation is brutal but simple. When the spotlight moves, you move with it, or you ignore it completely. Fans pointed to examples instantly. Hall of Fame level players who weren't always the most loved or most marketed, but never made it sound like a burden. In that comparison game, silence is strength. Complaints, even when emotional and honest, are treated as weakness. And that standard is rarely applied evenly, but it's applied ruthlessly.
Wilson's resume made this comparison even harsher. She wasn't a fading veteran or someone fighting for relevance. She was at the peak of her powers, still winning, still dominant, still decorated, which made the discomfort she expressed feel, to some fans, disproportionate. Not because she wasn't allowed to feel it, but because elite status comes with an expectation of insulation. Fair or not, champions are supposed to be untouchable. At the same time, Caitlin Clark was being framed as the opposite archetype, unbothered, focused, almost silent off the court, letting highlights do the talking. That contrast sharpened everything. The more Clark avoided the conversation, the more Wilson became associated with it. One player said very little, the other explained her feelings honestly. And honesty, in this case, was the more dangerous option. This is the trap of comparison. Once fans decide how you're supposed to act, any deviation gets magnified. Wilson wasn't being compared to her peers anymore. She was being compared to an idealized version of how champions handle pressure. And those ideals leave no room for vulnerability, especially when the pressure isn't coming from opponents, but from popularity itself. That's why this moment stuck. Not because Wilson said something outrageous, but because she broke character. She spoke like a human in a role fans expect to be armor-plated. And once that armor cracks, people don't lean in with empathy, they lean in with judgment. And that judgment doesn't disappear, it lingers, waiting for the next clip, the next look, the next confirmation. This is the point where the story stops being about what already happened and starts being about what comes next. Because when the WNBA tips off again, none of this will reset. Caitlin Clark will still be drawing sold-out crowds. Her jersey will still be everywhere, in every arena, in every camera shot. And A'ja Wilson will still be one of the best players in the world, carrying expectations that don't come with silence anymore. The league has changed, and pretending it hasn't won't protect anyone from it. There's a fork in the road here. One path leans into the reality of this moment. It acknowledges that attention isn't a finite resource, that growth doesn't erase greatness, and that the next era doesn't have to push the last one aside.
That version of the story is simple. Talk less about what's being lost and show why you're still the standard. Let dominance drown out distraction. Let the game reclaim the conversation. The other path is riskier. It treats every jersey, every cheer, every headline as confirmation that something is being taken away. And once that mindset sets in, everything becomes personal. Every look feels loaded. Every clip becomes evidence. And the focus drifts further from basketball into narrative management, where nobody really wins. What makes this moment so important isn't who's right or wrong. It's what it represents for women's basketball as a whole. The league finally has the attention it's chased for decades, and now it has to prove it can carry it without turning inward. Stars don't just define eras by how they play, they define them by how they react when the spotlight shifts. Because in the end, the cameras aren't going away, the fans aren't going away, the jerseys aren't going away. The only thing that can change is how this moment is remembered, as the start of a fracture or the moment the league learned how to hold growth without losing itself. And that decision is being made in real time, whether anyone admits it.